science and religion. Well, I like to hear Professor speak, obviously. Can science and religion never work in tandem? Is it? And like the question Mr. Whiteside was asking, would you teach creationism in schools?
Yeah. Well, thanks. That's quite a challenge. I don't see huge struggles between science and religion. I see that, as other speakers mentioned today, I'm a scientist and do research. As somebody once says, do you do research on animals? And I said, oh no, I only do research on humans. I've done lots of clinical trials in humans. So it seems to me that science is a tool that we can use to solve practical problems. If we're trying to understand disease, understand our body, whereas I see my faith towards and maybe other faiths as explaining earlier here, what is our meaning in life, how should we behave.
Right. When science contradicts our religion, what do you side with that?
I see that there are relatively few of those. I know in Christianity there's a famous debate between Charles Darwin, the Darwinians, and the Anglicans in Oxford when Charles Darwin taught the theory of evolution. I'm a very convinced evolutionist, and I don't see a literal meaning to the stories of Genesis as the correct interpretation. I see that the Bible is like a book of poetry, like a book of parables. Genesis, the creation story, is to tell us about things like there is evil in the world, Cain killed Abel, his brother. So it tells us about some of the basic structures of the world and how we should react as human beings. I don't see it as a literal scientific explanation for how the world got here. There are some Christians who believe that the world was created in 7 days. I'm certainly not among them, and I would put you that while they may be very verbal, they're in a minority.
Right. So, since you're as a professor, would you teach creationism in schools?
As a professor, would I teach? I certainly don't teach creationism
No.
in my classes. In fact, I do exactly the opposite. I believe in the model of biology and understanding how we come to be here, how the world comes to be here through evolution is a very powerful tool for understanding things like embryology and science. So would I tolerate creationism in schools? I think in Ireland there are a lot of schools that have a Christian board. In many schools in Ireland, a church board controls the school, and I've been on such a board from a church representative point of view. But that doesn't mean that we would want our children learning a biblical literalism as to explain how we come to be here. So I don't share those views at all. I think that's a very narrow, very sort of individualized view of Christian understanding that I would suggest a lot of modern Christians don't share. So I think the answer is no. I've brought that.
I think one of the great pities is that for so long people were taught that this was literally the case, that the world was created in 7 days, and that the Bible was literally true. And the sadness is that this goes on, and there's a huge number of creationists in America. I mean, America is an extraordinarily paradoxical country where some people are very liberal and very forward-thinking and very informed, and others are so traditional that they do believe literally that there are still, of course, questions to be answered. And as I said earlier on, there is still a mystery. In fact, I was amazed. I've got a little 5-year-old grandson, and he asked his father a wonderful question recently. He said, "Dad, what was here before the universe?" Which is a tough question to be asked. And his father thought, and I think he gave a very good answer. He said, "They don't know, but they're trying to find out." And as we all know, science is all about trying to find out. And I think as time goes on, we are finding out more and more. But there are still certainly mysteries. And I have no problem with mysteries. I think we sort of, in a way, we like mysteries. And I'll go back to what I said earlier on. I think a lot can be explained, but when we go right back to what started at the very beginning, we don't know. But as a humanist, and just as a human being, I see no reason to create a religion or to have a God to help me to over that mystery. I think I'm happy just to live with the mystery.
Just to follow up on that.
Yeah.
I know the Humanist Association in Ireland, they work on secular teaching in schools. So, just a question on that. Would you rather they completely remove religious scriptures in schools?
Well,
would you rather they teach
our place on education, and we're very, very clear on this, is we believe that all children should be educated together, as was intended in 1831 when the national school system was set up in Ireland. It was set up as a secular system where all children would be educated together. Later on, and we needn't go into the whys and the wherefores, but the churches ended up controlling the schools. And what we would like to see would be all children being educated together, to have a religious module in the school day where they learn about world religions, because it's something which they should learn as part of education. And they should also learn about values and ethics and what matters in relationships and all of that. And then after school hours are finished, we believe that schools should make facilities available to the different religions as is required to do what we would call faith formation.
So is it just one particular religion you're talking about, or is it all religions?
I'm talking about all. I think everyone should be educated together. I hate the idea of having a Church of Ireland school and a Catholic school and a Muslim school. In fact, just a very, very quick story. I was brought up, does anyone know where the Liffey Valley Shopping Centre is? Yeah. We sort of all know where that is. I was brought up, obviously, well before it was built, but on what was the main road going to Galway, between Parmesan and Lucan. And I was very fortunate. I was brought up in a very nice house, which didn't belong to us. My father worked for a bank, and it belonged to the bank, so don't think that we were posh or anything like that. But we had a lovely house there, and we had a tennis court. And I played tennis with my brother every summer. 5 houses up, there was another family who I never met until after I left school. And they had a tennis court, and they played tennis together, and we both wished that we had someone else to play with. They were Catholics, and we were Protestants, and we didn't meet. We didn't meet until I started going to the local pub and drinking at the age of 18, and I met, terrible. But, what a terrible thing to educate people separately and to have this totally artificial division between them. We're all human beings, we all share this earth. We should be doing things together. That's my feeling.
I'll move on to the next speaker, Mr. Tzortzis. What are your opinions on science and religion contradictions? Which side would you go?
Well, it's a false question, for sure. I mean, and the reason I'm saying this is because we seldomly study the philosophy of science. Just go to any academic institution in the West, study the philosophy of science on any level, even on a postgraduate level, and you will see that science does not lead to absolutes. That's one of the beauties of science. If you study Hume's problem of induction, you study holism, you study Popper, you study Reichenbach, you study Bertrand Russell, you study all of these people, you see that science does not lead to absolutes. And so the question assumes that there's an absolute scientific fact truth, and there's this religious claim, and therefore you have to do this reconciliation. No, they may contradict. In the 19th century, they contradicted for sure. Today, they might not contradict, but tomorrow they may. They may contradict again. But the point, so therefore, the problem is that we're not understanding what is the role of religious scripture when it talks about man, life, and the universe, and what's the role of science. What's the role of Islamic scripture? It's talking about the metaphysical why, talk about ontology, the nature of being, to talk about the kind of metaphysical truths that you're always going to conclude regardless of the science. And that's the point. So when there's a verse in the Quran mentioning about some natural phenomenon, it's not to give you details about processes. It's regardless of what you know about the how and the process, that there's always going to be this truth that there is a creative power and wisdom behind the universe. You can use any language. Einstein used interesting language, other secular scientists use interesting language, but they're not going to deny the fact that there must be some form of power and there must be a wisdom behind the universe. So the point here is there is not much of a contradiction. If there is a contradiction, it should never be a problem, because science is supposed to change. There's a really interesting philosopher of science, and he's a scientist as well. His name is Hugh Welch Jr., and he wrote the book Scientific Method in Brief. I believe it's published by Cambridge. And he says, to insist that science leads to atheism gets high marks for enthusiasm, but low marks for logic, right? Because it's a logical leap. Islam says, accept all the science. You don't have to accept it creedally, because even, for example, take Darwinism as an example. It's a false problem. Darwinism is part of the limited human endeavor, part of limited human knowledge. It's not absolute, right? I know it's the humanist and the secularist creation story, but it's not absolute, right? Yes, it's the best that we have from a scientific paradigm. Does it mean it's the gospel truth? No pun intended, right? No, it doesn't mean it's the gospel truth. And that's the beauty of science. We should accept it as something that's always evolving. Again, no pun. Yeah. So if we understand this, then we will never have a problem. One talks about metaphysical spiritual realities, existential realities. The other one talks about what we have at our disposal. And remember, always remember this. You may have a future observation that denies previous conclusions. That's the nature of science. Okay? Even when you think something works, because that's not an argument. Richard Dawkins once said in a lecture, science is true because it works. But that's false, because if you study philosophy of science, it's not true. Take, for instance, the concept of phlogiston. We believed in phlogiston as a theory in the 1700s. Phlogiston. In combustible objects, when you burn them, they released phlogisticated air. It was a workable theory. Made predictions. It was beautiful. To the point where Dan Rutherford in the 1770s, he used phlogiston as a theory, and he found the truth, which was nitrogen. But then they found out that phlogiston was full of rubbish. It wasn't the truth. It was a false theory. And that teaches us a few things. That something can work, and it's going to be based on a falsehood. And something can be true that comes from something that works that is not true. And that's the nature of science. We deify science as a community, honestly. We make it to like this deity. It's a human project, and we accept it. Muslims accept it. The first scientist was a Muslim, according to David Siedenberg. He's a historian of science. Read the book. The first scientist, Ibn al-Haytham. Ibn al-Haytham wrote a book on optics in the 10th century, 11th century. And it was the first systematic scientific method. If you look at his biography, what does Ibn al-Haytham say? I was motivated by Islam. We know the golden period of Islam, the convivencia in Islamic Spain. Professor Thomas Arnold says if it wasn't for Muslim Spain, you wouldn't have the Renaissance. You know? This is the Islamic tradition. Teach us to accept the observation of science, but don't make metaphysical claims from them, because you're always going to have limited observation. Always. As Barker and Kitcher, philosophers of science, in the book Philosophy of Science, they mention the same thing. They say, look, you're never going to observe everything. You're never going to have an infinite number of observations. They're always limited, so things can change. So I think it's a false question, but even if it's a contradiction, so what? It's two different realities. It's not a problem. By saying that, I just want to end on this. The irony of the whole discussion, though, is if you study the philosophy of science, which is a rare study these days, you would understand there are key assumptions to science. Would you believe it? There are assumptions to science. Science is based on faith as well. Study this for yourself. Read the works of Professor Thomas Nagel. One of the key assumptions of science is that you trust your rational faculties. That your rational faculties can eventually lead to the truth. That you have cognitive faculties that can eventually lead to the truth. The irony with this assumption is that that can only be best explained by God. Because under a naturalistic worldview, which is there's no supernatural, everything can be explained by physical processes, how do you explain the fact that you can trust your mind? To claim natural selection is wrong, because you can have false beliefs that lead to survival. As Professor O'Brien says, some tribesmen could believe all fungi are poisonous, and that could lead to survival, but it's a non-rational belief. And it also renders the whole human project as rationality comes from non-rationality. So the minute you do science, it implies God anyway in the first place. That's it.
As Hinduism, we always believe in secular things, that science and religion can go together, person as well. So there is no harm in teaching all the religions, main religions to the class, so that everyone should respect each other, beliefs and thoughts of the other person as well. And science can go side by side. And most of the time we will see, as Hamza said, these things will come on something we may not know today, but they might come out to be true after some time. So there is no harm in keeping those things in the head and then working on the scientific evaluation as well.
Right. Just to move a bit, since we're talking about secularism, what are your thoughts on separation of, well, I'm going to say church and state, but Like in India, with the ban B, what are your thoughts on like separating legislation and separating religion? Do you think there should be any effect religion should have?
Yeah, no, religion is basically more of a personal thing, right? But as far as the state is concerned, they have their own legislation, and some effect will always come from the religion, but not the full effect.
But no, I'm asking your, do you think religion should have an effect?
No.
Not at all. I'll just move on. Mr. Tzortzis, your thoughts, separation of church and state, religion and state, I guess.
Well, Islam does not have a problem. We don't have the historical baggage of Europe, and it's unfortunate that many people study what happened in the 16th century Reformation and they apply it to all religions. And it's an unfortunate thing. We use a limited experience and we apply it to all other experiences. Look, it didn't work for the Catholic Church, therefore all religions are the same. But if we just look toward a little bit to the east, we see there was this convivencia going on. There was a coexistence between a religious ethic and narrative and science and progress and development and convivencia. Yes, don't get me wrong, I don't want to glorify Islamic history. We had some bad parts of our history, yeah. But we can say humbly that basically the good parts were because of our tradition. So, in a way, it's a bit of a false question. I mean, Islam, generally speaking, is not what we would call a secular tradition. It's an ethical tradition, for sure. We have our own perspective on, for example, the just war, the rules of war, economics. We wouldn't adopt a secular capitalist view, for example. No way, we would even call that unethical. Because we believe the problem with economics is not basically just building more wealth, it's actually the problem of distribution. So we have different views on certain things, so we have different ethical filters, but that can only be done with discussion and dialogue and just having something to showcase. Unfortunately, Muslims don't have anything to showcase. We don't have, what do we have? Saudi is a capitalist model in Saudi, right? The kings have everything, everybody else has nothing. Dubai, what do they have? I mean, same neo-capitalist model. I mean, we don't have an area where we say, look, this is the beauty of Islam, this is the place that respects everybody, this is a place of compassion, this is a place of love, this is a place of convivencia, coexistence. Unfortunately, we don't have such a state of affairs. But we have to build within our communities, within a secular paradigm, and I really believe Muslims can live in a secular state, in peace, in harmony, tolerance, dialogue. We have a tradition of tolerance, when atheists were being killed in Europe, we were having dialogues in medieval Baghdad with atheists. Atheists, when they arose in the 8th century Islamic environment, the Dahriya they were called, there was dialogues. Al-Ghazali wrote a book about them. Well, he mentioned them in his book. He said that they're like ants walking on a book, thinking the globs of ink are just black things, but they don't see that it's meaning and words. Reductionists, they're not holistic. We had intellectual discussions. Abu Hanifa, one of the famous scholars of Islam, had an amazing debate with an atheist at this time. We didn't kill them, we had a convivencia dialogue with them. But it's true, but Europe was killing them. That's what I'm trying to say is, we're quite postmodern from that perspective. Abu Hanifa had a very famous debate and deliberately came late. He said, why are you so late for? He was like, the reason I was late is because I had to cross the river, I didn't have a boat, but all of a sudden, all the trees came together and it just formed a boat by itself and now I'm here. He's like, that's impossible. Well, if you don't believe that, you believe the universe came from nothing, man. Everyone's like, laughing. So, the point here is, we have this tolerance and we shouldn't see ourselves as like the fourth pillar or something, or the hidden column, whatever you call it, I forgot what you call it. Muslims should be publicly engaged, civically engaged, compassionate, tolerant citizens. Show what your ethics are about. This is what dawah is about. Dawah in Islamic tradition means positive outreach, articulating case for our tradition. Be people of compassion. We believe the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace with Allah, al-Rahmah, a mercy to all the worlds. We have to show this more than talking. We pontificate a lot. We need to start walking the walk now. Being really nice to our neighbors. Following some humanist aspects, because it's really silly to say us and them here. Because I know many humanists, these are some of the loving, nicest people I've met. My dad is a humanist, yes. Humanist, stroke, spiritual type, yeah. And he's one of the most loving, he's the loving person I know. I don't know anyone who's more loving than him at the moment, right? So the point is, we have to, learn from others, because it inspires you to look into your tradition again. And we're supposed to be holding these values too. Let's internalize them. So Muslims can live in a secular environment in a positive way, but do we have a unique tradition that has answers to things like economy and war and how to deal with the ridiculous bloodshed that's happening? Yes, we have answers to these things, but we can never really articulate these answers unless we show it within ourselves, isn't it, right? And that's the thing. So,
just to, again, I don't mean to antagonize you, just to get your opinion on it, like a yes or no. You mentioned Saudi, so like the religious policing in Saudi, would you agree with that?
The religious police in Saudi, I don't know much about the religious police in Saudi, but one thing I do know is that the Islamic tradition teaches you to account yourself before you account others, and this is the big crisis of our community. We like to point the finger, but there's always three fingers pointing back. In the early Muslims, when they read the Quran, it was a very spiritual, existential reading of the Quran. Today, when we read the Quran, it's an externalization of the Quran. So when we read Pharaoh and Moses, we look for the Pharaoh in the world, but we don't look at the pharaonic elements within ourselves. Yes, there's madness going on in Syria with that evil dictator, but what about the dictator aspects of our own hearts? So we treat our families unjustly, our children unjustly. We still have domestic violence at home in some parts of our community. And yet you think the world's going to change if you're not changing what's happening at home. You think God's stupid? It doesn't work that way. Allah says, Inna Allah indeed Allah will not change the situation unless they change and unless they change what's within themselves. This doesn't mean we don't now account and take people to account and command the good and forbid the evil. We should. This is part of our tradition. But at the same time, we should be internalizing the tradition for ourselves. We always externalize things. And that's why I think maybe people need policing because they haven't learned to police themselves properly. But Islam taught us to police ourselves spiritually. Before you go to bed at night, think about who you hate and turn that into love. The person who was guaranteed paradise by the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace, if he had any hate for his brothers, he was just trying to wash it away so he could purify his heart and have a love for his brothers. And that was a person of paradise. Do you see? So, we have a lot to do spiritually, ethically. By the way, I'm not saying that these places are the right places. I don't really, what I know of Saudi, does a great job in Hajj, the best that it can do. To manage 5 million people in a few square miles is the providential care of Allah is there. God is working, He's doing His mandate, if you like. But, I don't agree with everything. Obviously, I think the dictator is a dictator in Syria, and I'm not trying to be apologetic, thinking just focus on yourself, no, we focus on both. We have to do the social political work, we have to do the internal work, and sometimes we miss out the internal work, which is a huge shame. We haven't revived the inner sciences of Islam, which was part of our early tradition, and that's so important, and we belittle it, and we have to revive that, otherwise you're not going to see change. As Gandhi said, right, if you don't change yourself, you're not going to change the world. So.
That is the basic philosophy of Hinduism. We are more towards ourselves. If we improve ourselves, other person will improve ourselves. Instead of putting fingers on others, put fingers on our own side.
I'll pass on the question to that side, to my side.
This is about separation of church and state. Well, we absolutely believe in having a secular state where there should be no advantage in having a particular religion or any religion. I mean, I think it must stand the test of logic. I mean, I'll just tell you a story. I had a very interesting meeting some years ago with the Catholic Archbishop of Dublin, who I met at a function, and he invited me over to his house. And I asked him what he felt about the requirement for a religious oath for high office in this country. And I know I'm going back on that, but it's the simplest example, for the office of President of Ireland, or for the Council of State, or to be a judge in court. You must take a religious oath. And I asked Archbishop Dermot Martin how he felt about this. And he felt that it was wrong in a modern democratic republic in the 21st century.
In response to this, I would say that Christian churches down through the years have varied dramatically on this. Historically, my analysis is that many states use religions to prop up the power and authority of the secular leaders by insisting on a homogeneous church that supported and didn't challenge the legitimacy of the secular authorities. So historically, in Europe and in other countries, there's been a use of religion, and I would say religions have been used to prop up power and authoritarian institutions and structures, and to not challenge those.
Think Henry VIII.
Yeah, we decided he didn't want taxes going out to Rome, so let's form our own church and keep the monasteries for government institutions. There are multiple instances of this. So in many cases, I believe it's the case that religions have been used, and the institutions of religion have been used as a tool of power to reinforce the legitimacy of secular organisations or governments, and to give them a vitality that they don't automatically have otherwise. And that still happens all over the world. So, again, my own personal experience is growing up as a member of a very small ethnic minority or religious minority in this country, and that wasn't a particularly pleasant one, because there was very large extent we would see Ireland as a theocracy from 1920 to 1950, run by a church, and for those who are not members of that church, that wasn't a pleasant experience at many levels. So my own community's experience is that living in a theocracy of somebody else was distinctly unpleasant. So my conclusion is to definitely not have churches running states, and to separate out our state and our laws of the land from what we do in terms of religion. And that would apply to schools, apply to churches, apply to hospitals, and to other institutions of state like the government.
Alright, well, let's not forget as well that, secularism is not this kind of divine angel type system that spreads its wings over humanity, because the question implies that secularism is like this kind of ideal. Actually, it's not. Secularism arose as a result of compromise. When something arises out of a compromise, it's not really the best thing. So it needs re-evaluation. The most bloodiest century, I think, was the 20th century. More people died under non-religious ideologies than religious ideologies. This is almost like a fact now. So
let's not get into that.
Let's stick to 20th century now. And the point I'm trying to say here is that the system is not really the problem. Like Islam is quite deep. So the heart is the problem. So you could be a leader and you could have a secular kind of outlook, you can have a secular system. If the hearts of the people that are following the so-called system are not right, you're going to have disasters everywhere. That's why the Muslim scholars, even Ibn Taymiyyah, the 14th century theologian, he said that God prefers a just non-Muslim ruler over an unjust Muslim ruler. Because there were objectives for these laws, which is justice, peace, living together. So the point here is, we've seen secular states. These people don't have good hearts, and they create a mess. They create an absolute mess of things. For example, your problem was not knowing your neighbor. It wasn't a problem of religion. Your problem was one of individualism, which is a liberalism problem. If you study liberalism, its foundation is individualism, which, as the Jewish feminist philosopher Marian Friedman said, that individualism is looking at the self as an abstract entity devoid of social attachments. If you start with that as a primacy, then you're going to have these problems. The Children's Society report published in 2009 concluded the reason we have these problems is not because of religion, it's because of excessive individualism. Me, myself, and I, what's in it for me? That, in my humble opinion, is a neoliberal problem. And we see this everywhere. I mean, how many people know the second name of their neighbors? When was the last time you spoke to your neighbor 3 doors away? I mean, 100 years ago that would never be the case. But we live in this situation because we live in an excessively individualistic society. And I think, the academics dispute otherwise.
That has nothing to do with secularism. You were talking about secularism.
Yeah, I know, but individualism and secularism is quite combined, essentially, especially in the postmodern context. Because when you had the Reformation, the kind of the thinkers, they had to find a way and had to abstract the human being away from God's will for society. And in that premised in individualism, which premised liberalism. If you read the book of Professor Mashave from the London School of Economics, he mentions this very well in his introduction concerning the history of Europe. So a modern form of secularism is intertwined with liberalism. and that is premised on individualism. So it was a necessary compromise for the time because people were killing each other under the name of Christianity and religion, the 80-year-olds, the 30-year-olds, the massacre of St. Butler and Hussein. But my point is, these questions they have some false assumptions, which is like there's secularism, is like this angel. But there's problems in it, there's major problems in it.
But if this was a truly secular republic, it would allow each religion to practice their own religion in a very fair and even-handed way. Here we have a situation where you have to sometimes do something against your conscience because it's imposed by the law of the land, which gives unfair advantage to religion.
Yeah, I don't know much about it.
Indeed, the battle that we're fighting at the moment is that a huge number of people, in order to get their child into school, into a state-funded school, must have their child baptized, even if they have no religion.
Yeah,
this we call it pragmatic practice.
Yeah, that's
and it's the biggest campaign we have on at the moment.
Yes.
And I met the Minister for Education. I know we're sort of in between governments at the moment, but the government is still there. Janice Sullivan is the Minister for Education. I met her in January of last year, and I said to her, how can you allow a situation where parents have to do something totally against their conscience simply in order to get their child into a state-funded school?
The question follows on why do you think secularism is the only answer? Because there are other answers. For example, if you follow the Islamic ethic, you allow anyone to go to school.
You yourself have said that you don't have anything to showcase about it.
No, but that's the story.
So that's the story. In fact, that is the story.
It's theory and practice. So if you talk about theory as well, so are you. We will talk about theory.
No, we are not following story. We can show secularism has worked, is working at some place.
Well, it's not working in India.
It's not working.
It's killing the Sikhs. The Sikhs are getting massacred in India.
That's what you think.
The Muslims are getting massacred.
But it's not like you're Libya and Saudi Arabia and something like that. Syria.
I'm gonna step in between.
So therefore the problem is not the system, it's the human hearts.
Mrs. Tzortzis, I'm gonna step in between. Sorry about
My
that.
name's Hamza.
Sorry.
My mom never calls me Mr. Bro.
Alright, I'll call you.
That's not my name.
Alright, we'll just move on to the next question, and I think I want to open it up to the audience as well for questions. So now we've kind of known more about religion, more about each. So it's we know what the religion is about. So let's know what the religion is not about. So the next question, I'll just start from that. And what are the biggest misconceptions associated with it?
I've seen this question before and spent some time thinking about it, and it's quite a challenging one. Because do I answer it personally or do I answer it in terms of all the diversity? One of the first misconceptions is that Christianity